Recording in progress.
All right, so first, a few announcements. Homework 5 is due today just as usual. And remember that we also have a relaxed grading scheme for homework 5. So as long as you make a serious attempt for the problems, you'll get 100% of the credit. And the solutions will be posted tomorrow morning. And Tia Hadley has kindly written down the solutions to all the extra problems as well. So that should be helpful. And homework 6 will be out today. It's going to be a short homework with just 2 problems. And that's due this Saturday at noon, basically. Okay, so this is the only assignment that is due kind of within 5 days. And the reason is that we have our exam on Monday and we'll release the solutions on Saturday. At the same time, we will also write up some extra practice problems, kind of covering the last section, and post solutions to them on Wednesday once we're done with covering the material. Okay? And also, the official feedback is due this Saturday. Please fill it out. I'll try to gather feedback during the course and try to adapt the course accordingly. And if you give me more feedback, this will be useful for years to come. Okay? And many of the things that you see here were kind of based on things that I heard from our experiment last year. Okay. And finally, or not finally, but exam 3 is a week from now, next Monday. It's at 11:30 and it's only 110 minutes, just as all the other exams. It will end at 1:20 p.m. It's in this hall, Moore Hall 100, and it will cover just the lectures 15 through 20. It's non-cumulative, only the last 6 lectures. And the TAs are also holding extra office hours because we missed 2 discussion sections, unfortunately, because of Thanksgiving. And I am also going to hold extra office hours. I'll have office hours from 2 to 4 today and on Wednesday. And as usual, if you have any questions, please post them on EdSTEM. Okay? And I know we had some issues with exam 2 with shortages of exams. Basically, it never happens, but somehow the staff, when I asked them to print out 200 exams, they only printed 180. But so we were short a few exams, but thankfully the TAs were quick on their feet and figured out a way to solve the problem. For exam 3, we should be fine. Okay? Any questions about the logistics of the course? Yeah? Sorry, couldn't hear you. Grading is homework 5 is the relaxed grading scheme that we've been using for homework 3 and 4. So if you make a serious attempt, you'll get 100%. That. Okay? Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you. The last exam? Yeah, it's only 2 hours. It's only 2 hours. I mean, usually we have a 3-hour assigned slot, but as I said at the beginning, we are only following like the same template for all 3 exams, which is they are non-cumulative, short exams, same number of points, and it's going to be only 110 minutes, just as the other 2 exams. Okay? Any other questions about the grading and everything? And if you have any lingering regrade requests, please get everything finalized this week. I know that I'm sure the TAs are handling them well, but if there's something unresolved, please bring it to my attention after going through the TAs first. But finalize all regrade requests by this weekend. Okay? And once exam 3's grading is done, we'll release them and maybe give a few days for you to submit any request, but then I'll have to submit the final grades. All right? Okay. Are there any other questions about the logistics? Okay. But please fill out the feedback forms. There are 200 students, and I hope that at least 200 of you will fill them out. And I'll let you know how many I have so far by Wednesday. Okay? So with that out of the way, let's start with our class. So last class, we kind of finished up our discussion of context-free grammars, which we kind of motivated as a model interesting by itself, but also a restricted model of computation compared to Turing machines. And we saw limitations of context-free grammars, that certain languages are not context-free, even if they're very simple, like doubles. And we proved that using the pumping lemma for context-free grammars. And then towards the end of the class, we started discussing about, are there natural problems that are uncomputable? And talking along those lines, we started kind of this philosophical discussion about whether or not we can prove everything, all right? And in this week, in this lecture and the next lecture, what we're really going to do is kind of, I can say we are going to finish with a bang. These two theorems are Gödel's incompleteness theorem, for instance, is the most influential theorem in mathematical logic, but it's very close to all the stuff we are doing. And given the things that we are done, we can understand its statement and almost do its full proof. And when it came out, it was just revolutionary. It changed math forever and also computing forever. And the other thing we'll talk about is self-recursion and Kleen's recursion theorem, which is again very mind-bending. It's only going to be, in some sense, 10 lines of programming, but you probably have never seen 10 lines that are so confusing. Okay, but we'll get to them slowly. All right. And in this last two lectures, we won't go through full rigorous proofs, but I want to get the main ideas across to you. Okay? All right. So let's start with a discussion of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So the goal was to answer this sort of philosophical question, can we prove everything that is true? Okay, it's kind of, there's a lot of very vague terms here. One is, what does prove mean and what does true mean, right? Which comes first? It's like a chicken and egg question. If you can't prove something, is it even true? If you're proving something, shouldn't that be a true statement to begin with? Well, let's not get into that debate right now, but we introduced like a good abstraction to that, right? And the abstraction we had was the following. True statements / theorems. Right? So we could think of true statements or theorems as just some collection of binary strings. And you can think of your favorite, like let's say these are even statements in English, but at the end of the day, we can encode them just as binary strings. This could be statements in math. You could use all kinds of math symbols, but we can just encode them as binary strings in the end, right? So we were imagining that there is some language which is a set of truths that we are trying to get proofs for. Okay, so anything which is in the language is going to be a true statement. Anything outside is not true. So let's talk in this generality for a little bit, and then hopefully it will make more sense once we kind of specialize to one very important example. Okay, so that's kind of what truth is. It's a very simple explanation for what truth is. Okay, but what's a proof then? How can I define what a proof should be? So what is a proof? Any guesses? What should it really be? Imagine, in a homework, I asked you for a proof. What am I really asking for? What does a proof help you, right? Suppose I prove a statement. to you, what does it mean? How is proof as written different from actually solving a problem? One intuitive way to abstract this is that proof is something that lets you verify a statement. Okay? It's easier to prove something than to verify whether or not a proof is correct. Right? They ask you to solve a problem, that's much harder than I give you the solution and ask you to check whether or not it is correct. In most cases, that's the situation, right? It's easy, it's harder to solve the Sudoku puzzle rather than, I give you the solution and ask you to verify whether or not my solution is correct, right? So we should think of proof in that context. Proof allows us to verify something. Okay? There is truth, and then proof is something that allows us to verify whether or not the statement is true. And in my view, the verification part should be much easier than coming up with the proof in the first place. All right? So, in other words, just the main idea, the big idea is that proof is something that lets you verify the truth. Okay? And it might seem very vague and kind of philosophical, but this notion, this abstraction of proof permeates, is everywhere in computer science, really. In cryptography, you see all kinds of proofs where these are things that help you verify something. And in distributed computing and so on, they're very important. All right. So in some sense, okay, so now we are again punting the ball, right? So proof is something that lets you verify the truth. But then we introduce another ambiguous term here. What does it mean to verify? What should it mean to verify? If I ask you, give you a proof, of some complicated Fermat's last theorem, which is 400 pages long, and ask you to verify it, it's not very helpful, right? Because you probably need a lot of background to understand the proof. Some things are understandable by me, some things are understandable by you, some things are not, understandable only by, let's say, maybe a computer even, right? So what does it mean to verify in this scenario? So the answer to this puzzle is kind of, okay. So we need to be a bit more precise about this process of verification. Okay, and the way we'll do that is to introduce what are called proof systems. Okay. So a proof system at heart is just a verification procedure, or you should really think of it as an algorithm for proofs. Okay. Meaning we are going to think of a verification algorithm, right? So there is some algorithm which takes the proof and then checks whether or not it is true. Right? If I give you a mathematical proof, then you can check whether each statement is true or false. Does it follow from the previous sentences? Maybe you are just using some implication rules. I can check all of them mechanically. Okay? So that's what verification means. But so what properties would we like a verification algorithm to satisfy? Can you think of some properties that a verification algorithm should satisfy? think of each one of you as a verifier, right? I'm going to give a proof of some statement of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and you're going to verify whether or not the proof is correct, right? So you or somebody else. What properties should your verification algorithm satisfy? What would be some natural requirements at the very least that you'd like it to satisfy? Yeah? It should output the same thing? Sure. So maybe let me change that, maybe strengthen it a little. I'm going to call some property soundness, right? Soundness means that you cannot cheat the verifier. Okay, so what does this mean? If a statement X is false, then there is no proof for X. Okay, so you are the verifiers. Okay, then if you're a sound verifier, that means I cannot give any proof that will convince you that 2 plus 2 is 5. Okay, I mean, there might be some silly verifiers. I can easily convince my toddler that 2 plus 2 is 5. So she is an unsound verifier, right? Okay. Verification by itself is an absolute procedure. We always think, when we think of any verifier, that must be sound, but there's actually a necessity that we have to impose. Okay, we take it for granted most of the time, but it's something that we need to impose. All right. It's an algorithm, which, given any proof, given any statement, you cannot convince it that a false statement is true. This is called soundness. And the other property, which is a bit counterintuitive, is effectiveness. Okay. So soundness is saying you cannot convince the verifier that a false statement is true. But then, there may be a verifier who just is, a contrarian who rejects every statement. 2 plus 2 is 4, no, false. That's also a useless verifier, right? Tautologically, the verifier is sound because he rejects every statement. But we want also that there is some, the verifier can be convinced of some things. Okay? And the way we'll say it is, given a proof, the verifier terminates and says an answer. Okay. The verifier just can't go into an infinite loop given a proof. Now, you give me the Fermat's last theorem proof, I'll probably go into an infinite loop, but I'm not an effective verifier in that sense. Okay, yeah?
A verifier then just do said and always say false, like always refuse to verify anything.
Yeah, so that comes down to another property that we'd like, which is completeness. Okay, what is completeness? For every true statement, there is some proof that convinces the verifier. Okay? Again, we'll make all of this very precise, right? But these three properties are rather natural things that we would want from any verification system. right? To think of real world, completeness is probably the one that gets most violated by conspiracy theories or something, right? There's no proof that will convince them that, let's say moon landing wasn't a fake. They'll always find some holes in the arguments, right? So all of these three are pretty natural things that we would require. Okay, I want my verification system to be sound. You cannot convince me of falsehoods. Effectiveness, I'm going to give an answer in finite amount of time. Not infinite, but in a finite amount of time. Okay. Completeness is saying, okay, maybe for every true statement, there is some proof that convinces me. Okay. Any questions about these three concepts? Okay. So let's be more precise, and we will mainly talk about these two things first: soundness and effectiveness. Yeah. Can you say it again? Sorry. That's an excellent question. So the verification, the proof system, the verification algorithm, the proof system should take both of them, right? It should take the statement and the proof, right? So for instance, if you think yourself as a verifier, I can convince you that 2 + 2 is 4, or like certain language is not regular. All of these are different statements that you can verify when given an appropriate proof, right? So ideally, we would like our verification system to take a statement and a purported proof for the statement, and then do something with it. Okay? All right. So, jumping the gun a long way, these three are very desirable properties, and we kind of take them for granted most of the time, right? And computer verification of proofs is kind of a holy grail in sciences, right? If you can verify things by computer, that will be great. Who is going to write down, manually check 600 pages of proof for something like, let's say, the ABC conjecture, right? But what Gödel did was to show that you cannot satisfy these three properties. Okay, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So let me elaborate on those things. So a proof system for a language, again, we always start with some ground set of truths. B, the set of true statements. Okay, then a proof system for L is an algorithm V. Okay, it is an algorithm V, which takes as input the candidate statement that you're trying to check whether it's true or false, and the supposed proof for the statement. Everything is binary, but you should really think of them as just literal, like English sentences and whatever. And outputs 0 or 1. 0 means the proof, the second argument, convinced the verifier that the statement did not convince the verifier that the statement is true. 1 means it convinced the verifier that the statement is true. Okay? And we'll say the verifier is effective if for all statements and for all proofs okay. So we want an algorithm, a Turing machine or whatever in your favorite programming language, it takes the statement and the proof, and then halts and says 0 or 1. Right? So for instance, you can think of a verifier which checks whether or not a Sudoku puzzle is fillable, right? I give you X, which is an incomplete Sudoku puzzle, and then the proof would be something with the missing entries filled in, okay? Then the verifier will just check, oh yes, of course, this satisfies the constraint, so you filled in everything, and it is true that this puzzle is solvable. Okay? Or vice versa. Soundness. What should soundness say? For a false statement, no proof should work. Right? So meaning, if X is not in the language, it's not a true statement, then for all possible proofs, what should the output of the verifier be? When I give you this proof and this statement, I give you 2 plus 2 equals 5 and throw you 400 pages of proof. What should your answer be? 0. Right? You're not going to be fooled by any sort of ridiculous proofs I can throw at you if the statement is okay. So that's soundness. You cannot be convinced that something which is false is true. All right. And finally, completeness says what should a completeness statement be, right? Even if a statement is true, you could give me a wrong proof, that would mean I won't accept it. Or I could even accept wrong proofs, it depends on how clever you are with wrong proofs. But at the very least, there should be some proof which will let me say, yes, this statement is correct, right? So meaning, if a statement is indeed true, then there exists some proof such that there is some proof which will make you accept the truth of the statement. All right? Okay. So these 3 properties, you can define for any verifier, for any language, and there's a lot of research in formal languages and trying to build automated provers which do look at these kinds of properties and relaxations thereof. Okay? But so far we've been talking in some pretty abstract things, right? And we can now go back to something which started this whole area and definitions. Not started, but at least kind of put them on the grandstand. Okay. So this was in the 1900s. David Hilbert, a famous mathematician, kind of threw a challenge to everybody. He said, is there a proof system that is effective, sound, complete? It satisfies this trifecta of natural properties that we kind of almost take for granted for integers. Okay. Actually, let me say You could ask this for, let's say math, physics, chemistry, or anything like that. But he was asking specifically for statements about integers. Okay? Is there a proof system that is effective, sound, and complete for statements about integers? For him, and at the time, this was an important goal because people were trying to make math sort of putting it on very firm foundations. You have all these axioms. How many of these axioms do you need? And at what point are we complete? At what point are the rules that we have for checking proofs enough? Maybe modest exponents is enough. I have some other logical rules. Are they enough? At what point can we stop and say we have a complete, effective, and sound verification system? It's often easy enough to get effective and sound, but I say completeness is the hardest. Okay, at least for non-trivial proof systems. Okay. Does this high-level goal make sense at a high level? Okay. So the one thing which we still haven't been very precise is this part. Statements about integers. Okay. So you want a proof system that is a verifier, an algorithm that can mechanically check whether or not a proof is, verifies a statement, right? But what do we mean by statements about integers? We need a precise way to talk about those things, right? So what he meant really is, can I get a proof system for the language of all true theorems about numbers? Okay, especially about natural numbers. All right. So we have to get a little mathy, but I think it's very rewarding to just understand the statement. So what is this? There is this famous statement or quote by Kronecker that right. So what this is saying really is that once I have natural numbers, every other statement in math is just derivable from that. Okay, can be just phrased as some constraint that the natural numbers satisfy. And it is in that sense that Hilbert wanted to ask whether every statement in math can be provable by a computer one day. Maybe not in a year, 200 years, 400 years, but in some finite amount of time. If you come back, maybe 10,000 years later, will Riemann hypothesis be solved? Can you give me a guarantee that it will be solved? So the way we're going to formalize this is again very simple. You might have seen statements like this in your discrete math course or in other courses. These are basically statements of the form, or the true term to use. When I say statements about integers, I just mean quantified integer statements. Okay, or QIS. Okay, so what does QIS mean? It's best to illustrate just from examples, right? So let's say, take this statement. for all n, which is n in natural numbers, there exists m such that m is greater than n. Okay, so this is a quantified integer statement. There is some phrase m greater than n, and you are quantifying over integers. For all n, there exists n such that m is greater than n. When we say quantified integer statements, it just means that you have some formula which involves integers and multiplication, addition, greater than, less than, equal to. Those are the symbols. And you can have quantifications over the variables involved in the statements. Now, there exists for all, and quantified just means that every variable has been quantified. You don't have free variables in your expression. Okay. So is this a true statement or is it false? What is it saying in English? There's always a bigger number, or that the number of natural numbers is infinite. Okay, which we know is true. Okay, and let's say, maybe another statement is for all n, there exists m is greater than n, what is this saying? So I'm saying for all n, there is some number m, so that m is greater than n, and for some integer k, 2 times k equals m. What is this saying? Right, so it's essentially saying that there are infinite number of even numbers. Right, so for every number, there is a larger even number. Okay, there are an infinite number of even numbers. Okay, and you can keep going on like this. So before doing that, let me formally define what quantified integer statements are. Okay, when I write it down formally, it seems cumbersome and kind of messy, but pretty much whenever you see a statement, you can identify whether or not it is a valid QIS, right? You might have seen many examples of this before, but basically QIS, a quantified integer statement, is a well-formed logical statement with no free or unquantified variables, uses integers. You can use any integer like 2, 3, 5, them as constants. This goes back to here, God created natural numbers and the rest is us, meaning you're not going to allow pi, e and all irrational numbers. You don't need to. All you need to care about are the integers. You can have variables in them. You can have symbols, greater than, less than, plus, minus, multiplication, and equal to. That is basic arithmetic operations. Right? And then finally, you can have quantifiers for all, and there exists. Okay, so quantifiers over integers, over natural numbers, let's say, to be precise. Okay, and I'm mostly going to drop for this suffixes Whenever I say for all n, it means that for all natural numbers. When I say there exists, it means there exists a natural number such that the statement is true. Okay? So let's see some examples of it, right? You know, for instance, let's say there exists n x, y, z. Okay, so here I should really write there exists n, there exists x, there exists y, there exists z. There are 4 there exist, but I'm kind of only writing one there exists, just as shorthand, such that n is greater than or equal to 3, and oh, actually that's a tricky one. Let me not do that yet. Okay, so there exists x, y, z, such that they are non-zero, and x times x times x plus y times y times y equals z times z times z. Okay, so remember we are only allowed to use greater than, less than, plus, minus, and multiplication. So here I'm saying there exists x, y, z, which should be greater than 0, and x cubed plus y cubed equals z cubed. Right? I can't write x to the 5 or x to the 3 technically because I'm only allowed to use multiplication, but that's fine. If it's x to the 3, I can just write down x 3 times. Okay, and this, as some of you might know, is a false statement. They do not exist non-zero integers which satisfy this condition. Okay, it's kind of a special case of Fermat's last statement. Much easier to prove, of course. But on the other hand, let's say I change it to there exists x, y, z, x greater than 0, and y greater than 0, and z greater than 0, and x times x plus y times y equals z times z. Is this true? Yes, right? When this is, you can take 3, 4, 5, and that would satisfy this condition. Okay. We can also take something like for all n, there exists x, y, z. X is greater than n, and y is greater than n, and z is greater than n, and x times x plus y times y equals z times z. What is this statement saying, you know, in English? It's saying there are infinite number of Pythagorean triples, right? For every n, I can find x, y, z which are larger than n and satisfy the Pythagoras' condition, right? X squared plus y squared equals z squared. Meaning there are infinite number of Pythagorean triples. This statement is also true. But at this point, we really don't care about the statements being true or false. We're not doing math here, but we are codifying what math should be, right? You can make a statement like this. This is a quantified integer statement. There are 4 variables and all of them have been quantified. There is no free variable. Okay? And it is true or false, you know, that's kind of the underlying fact of universe, right? You know, this is true, you know, maybe the first example is false. All right? Here's another example. There exists x comma y such that x squared minus 2 is y to the 7. Or, in other words, x times x minus 2 equals y times y times y times y times. Okay? This is a simple enough statement, and its truth value is unknown. People have been trying to figure out whether or not x squared minus 2 equals y to the 7. Is there an integer pair that satisfies that? We do not know. It's been open for like 200 years. So now you can see why, if we had an automated way to verify these things, that would be great, right? Okay, and so that's where we are heading towards. So the goal now we have, right? You might think that if I ask you to prove a statement like this, that's maybe beyond computers. It takes too much ingenuity. You have to be very clever to come up with a proof and so on. But at the very least, we should be able to come up with a verification algorithm, right? In some sense, verification is much more mechanical than coming up with a proof in the first place, right? You just have to follow, okay, does this sentence follow from the previous sentences? Does the next sentence follow from the previous sentences, right? It's exactly like what you see in homeworks. And often solving the homework is much harder than kind of going through the solutions and verifying that the solutions make sense, right? And the main question is whether, given a QIS F, can we, and a proof, can we verify whether or not the proof is correct? Okay? And what Gödel showed in his really breakthrough paper when he was, I think, in his 20s or 30s, really, was the following. This is called Gödel's first incompleteness theorem, because he also showed a second incompleteness theorem, which is even stronger. So I'm going to call it GFIT, right? So I show that every proof system, or let me say, no proof system for QIS. If you take the language of all possible proof theorems about integers, there is no proof system, there is no verifier that is sound, effective, and complete. Okay. So in some sense, what it's saying is, if you think of myself, I am a verifier, I'm a Turing machine, I can verify math statements. Either I am unsound, you can convince me of a proof that is false, of a statement that is false, or there is a true statement that I cannot be convinced about, right? Either I'm a hypocrite or a conspiracy theorist, basically, right? So I am a Turing machine, I am a verifier. Either I am unsound. Meaning there is some statement which is true, which is false, but you convince me that it is true, or I am incomplete. Meaning there is some statement which is true, but no matter what proof you give me, I'm not going to accept it. Okay? There exists a statement, true statement, that I cannot be convinced about. Okay, which is quite surprising, right? You wouldn't think that verification should be so hard. It should not be so hard to come up with a complete system. Why is it hard? Like, you can imagine, okay, maybe this statement is something, you start with a sound system, which is effective, and then there is some statement which you cannot prove in the system. Maybe I'll add that as an axiom to the system. But then Gödel's incompleteness theorem says, there is some other statement which you will not be able to prove. You can keep adding things, but there is always a statement which is beyond the grasp of your abilities. Okay? And when it came about, it was really shocking. And this is Gödel in his 1931 paper. So if you know about his life, it's a very interesting story. He became very paranoid given all his theories, and he died of starvation in the end, and he weighed 57 pounds. It was dead. But at the same time, he had an amazing impact on logic. For instance, von Neumann said, the subject of logic will never be same again. And Einstein apparently was a great friend of Gödel. They both worked at the Institute for Advanced Study. And he thought that his own work did not mean much, and that he just came to work to merely talk to Gödel. And the final very funny story is what happened at his citizenship exam. Apparently back in the day, you would have US citizenship exams by a judge who would interview you and grant you citizenship. He came from Austria, and this dialogue is really hilarious. I don't know if you agree with it or not. If you can find a proof that the Constitution can allow it to become a dictatorship. Your guess is as good as mine whether he passed the exam or not. Okay. Anyway, so when we come back, we will take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we'll see kind of a semi-proof of the incompleteness of proof systems. Okay. All right. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. Okay, so Gödel's original proof of the first incompleteness theorem is really very different, and we'll get to that in a second. And I think that's a much more sort of clever and mind-blowing proof. But what we're going to do is just use the technology. Like Turing did a lot of hard work for us, and we can use this follows as a corollary of the things that we've done. Okay, barring one technical ingredient which we are going to skip. Okay, so this is Turing's proof of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Okay, so remember that the GFIT was proved before Turing's seminal work in 1936. So this is in 1931, that is 1936. But we can do the following. So the first thing is something that we had to spend quite a bit of blood and sweat, but I don't think it has any big ideas per se. So let me define So theorem is that the language L is uncomputable. Okay. So wait, what do you mean by L? QIS is uncomputable. Okay. So recall. Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me write it down properly. UQIS is uncomputable, where this is all true QIS statements. Okay. So if I consider the language of all statements, of all true statements, of all true quantified integer statements, then this is uncomputable. Meaning, hold on, this seems to be a question. Is saying there are true statements for which our verifier will not accept any proof. The same as saying there are true statements we cannot prove. Yeah, exactly the same. So Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that there are true statements that this verifier cannot prove. And no matter what verifier you come up with, there is always a true statement about integers that verifier cannot prove. Okay. Which is why it is counterintuitive. You might think, okay, if there is a statement that I cannot prove, add that into the machine, just hard code that into the machine. Now maybe Fermat's last theorem was unprovable. I just add that as an axiom, and then maybe next someone else will come up and say there's something else that you cannot prove, and so on and so forth. So what is this statement saying? Saying, if I give you input a QISF, okay, and my goal is to check 1 if f is true, 0 otherwise. Okay, this itself is uncomputable. Computing the function which checks whether or not a formula is true or false, that is uncomputable. Now it might seem like we're already done with proving GFIT, but it's not the same, right? Here I'm asking you to solve the problem from scratch, right? Saying I cannot verify by a computer directly, not verify, but I cannot check, I cannot output whether or not a formula is true just from scratch. That part is uncomputable. Okay, but GFIT is saying something else. It's saying even if you can ask for hints, even if you can ask for proofs, it is still not possible to verify. Okay, so it's significantly different. Maybe there are many problems for which you cannot find a solution to, but given a solution, given a proof, you can verify whether or not the proof is correct. Okay, so there is always this dichotomy between verifying whether a solution is correct or coming up with the solution in the first place, right? And what this theorem is saying is I can't just solve the problem on a computer directly, okay? But it doesn't necessarily imply that I cannot verify when given a solution. Okay. So, meaning, let's say I define this function UQIS. I want to make this distinction a bit clearer, so I'm going to write it down again. We treat every binary string as some kind of quantified integer statement, and this is the function which takes a quantified integer statement as the input and just outputs 1 or 0, right? And this theorem is saying that this function uqis is uncomputable. Okay, it's kind of a surprising statement too, right? Just checking whether formulas are true is uncomputable, right? And we're not going to prove this theorem, but just as a hint, you can actually come up with a reduction from halt on 0, right? So there's a somewhat of a complicated reduction which shows that given any machine M, I can come up with a quantified integer statement which is true if and only if the machine halts on 0. Okay, and it's kind of, again, we did the other direction in some sense, but this is saying for all there exists a reduction R which takes a machine and outputs a QIS, a machine, a QIS, such that M halts on 0 if and only if R of M is true. Okay, which is again very remarkable because you're saying that integers themselves, a statement about integers can capture the entire behavior of a program, right? R of M just talks about integers. It's something like, okay, there exists x comma y, so that x squared minus 2 equals 7, or y to the 7, or something like that. Some such statement. There is no computation or anything involved in this R of M, but the behavior of M, whether or not it halts, is captured exactly by this quantified integer statement. Okay? I mean, coming up with this reduction is quite complicated, but Gödel himself did it. That first encode programs as integers and then show that integers themselves can do some computation and all that stuff. Okay? But let's take this statement as granted that the function uqis is uncomputable. But as I said, this doesn't necessarily imply that there is no verification system. Okay, there's a big difference between verification and coming up with a solution in the first place. But as it turns out, in this case, we can use the uncomputability of uqis to prove GFIT. Okay, let me give this a name. This statement I'm going to call unqis, just for brevity. And my goal is to show the next few minutes that okay, if I know that the function uqis is uncomputable, then there is no sound, effective, and complete verifier for QIS. Okay. Why is this? Let's prove it by contradiction. Again, there's a lot of notation here, but once I write it down, hopefully it will be clear. Suppose there exists a complete sound and effective verifier V for QIS. Okay, meaning for every true statement, there is a proof, and whenever there is a proof, the statement must be true. Yeah? Oh, so this UNQIS is just shorthand for this entire statement that, yeah. Okay, so, yeah. Okay, so we know we are accepting that this function UQIS is uncomputable, and from there I want to show there is no verifier which is complete, sound, and effective. Okay, if I drop any one of these three properties, then I can get a verifier, but getting all three properties, all three naturally desirable properties, is impossible even for integers, statements about integers. Okay. So why is this true? Well, what we're going to do is to do a proof by contradiction. Suppose there exists a complete, sound, effective verifier. We're going to show that this implies that UQIS is computable. Okay, it's kind of a circular logic again, which we've been doing all along. Kind of, we were saying, okay, verification should be easier than coming up with a solution in the first place. But in the context of Turing machines, when your Turing machine is a verifier, if there is a verifier, there is something which will actually solve the problem directly. Okay, how can I shortcut the verifier and find the solution myself? Imagine, I have it's easy to code up a verifier for pseudocode puzzles. But this is saying if there is a verifier for pseudocode puzzles, there is an algorithm which can even solve the pseudocode puzzles. How can I go from a verifier to a solver? Yeah?
Just try all nine.
Okay, so let's try that. That's an excellent idea. So now, so what's our input? Our input is a formula f that we are trying to check whether it's true or false. And our goal is to check whether or not the formula is true. And the suggestion was output is f true, right? So the suggestion was, maybe for every proof W, which is in 0, 1 star, if your verification worked, you say, yes, the verifier is true, and the formula is true. Okay? You're kind of brute forcing over all possible proofs. I give you an assignment problem to solve. You're just going to solve, do a brute force search or all English strings of length 10 lines, and eventually one thing will click, and you're going to output, yes, this problem is true. Okay? It's kind of a silly idea. But is this, okay, beyond silliness and taking a lot of time, what else can go wrong? Yeah?
It might not halt.
Yeah. So if you're talking to, if you're working for a nefarious professor like me, I can give you a wrong statement in the assignment, and then you'll just be enumerating forever, right? So verification just said that if the statement is true, there is a proof, right? But if the statement is false, then you're never going to find a proof, so you're never going to output anything. You might be just going in infinite loop. How can I try and fix that? Yeah?
We also consider litigation statement.
Yeah, so first case might be that if I say, okay, when I see a 0, can I immediately say 0? If some proof did not work, that doesn't mean the statement is false, right? There can be a million wrong proofs. Maybe the first thing I check is a wrong proof, but that doesn't say anything about whether or not the statement is true. Okay? So for every proof, we are just doing brute force search, and the other suggestion was so along with checking whether or not your proof worked for a statement, I'm also going to check the negation of the statement, right? So the thing with verifier is when they say 0, that the verification did not go through, it's not very confident, right? It's just saying, okay, this specific proof did not work. But if it says, okay, this proof worked, then we know something for certain about the statement, right? If I make you accept the proof, then the statement is true. If they don't, the proof did not work, that does not mean the statement is false. So we're trying to go around that. So either the statement is true, in which case there will be a proof which will make the verifier accept, and we'll say 1, or if the statement is false, its negation must be true, right? So not of f should have a proof. Okay, so these two things together will work. So given any statement, I'm just enumerating your all possible proofs, but not just checking for the truth of this statement. I'm also checking for the negation of the statement. At one point, no matter what the case is, either f is true or f is false. So either f or not of f must have a proof, and both cannot have a proof. That's because the system is sound, right? So we're using all three properties here. Okay, so we're using if f is in U, then there exists a proof W such that, right, this is completeness, right? In the same way, if f is not a true statement, then its negation is a true statement. So we will accept the negation. All right, and we know that the verifier will always terminate because of effectiveness, right? It never gets into infinite loop by itself. And finally, you're always going to output the right answer because of soundness. You cannot convince me that this, whenever this, if the statement is false, there is no proof which will make me say, yes, this statement is correct. Okay. So by soundness, effectiveness, and completeness, we have an algorithm for UQIS, okay, which contradicts our first theorem, this theorem that we did not prove. Okay, as long as we can accept that UQIS is uncomputable, we can conclude that there is no verifier. All right. Okay. Seems like, maybe we cheated a little bit because all of the complexity went into this part. UQIS is uncomputable. But I'd say that, this enumeration of both F and not F is also tricky, and it seems clear and easier now just because we have the language that Turing invented. That, you know, you can build Turing machines by combining other Turing machines and all of that. Okay? So you're kind of standing on Turing's work to conclude that verification in the context of Turing machines is enough to even give solvers when you have verifiers. Yeah? Question?
Yeah, can you explain why Apple did not have put in both equals?
Right, because, well, it's kind of a tautology, right? Tautology, right? Because either F is a true statement or not F is a true statement. Okay? Because QIS, if I take F and not of F, that would be a false statement. Right? So both cannot be true and both cannot be false for the same reason. Yeah?
That second statement for F was to be split.
This is also completeness, right? Because we want a proof which will make us accept not of F, right? So not of F is a true statement now. When I negate it, it's a true statement. There should be a proof for that. So for instance, you know, if you go back, like let's say to this example, right? So what's the negation of the statement? It will be for all x, y, z, either x is less than 0, or y is less than 0, or z is less than 0, or x cubed plus y cubed equals z cubed. Right? You just negate the whole thing. That's a true statement. And there should be a proof for the negated statement. Okay? Soundness is just saying that you won't say 1 in both cases, that your answer is actually correct. Okay? Yeah? Right. So the code is basically allowing us to convert a verifier to a solver, right? So imagine, you know, you have is you design a verifier for Sudoku puzzles. Okay, given a solution, I can check whether or not the puzzle is solvable, right? And now you say, okay, maybe Sudoku is kind of a bad example because there's a finite number of things. But let's say I give you a homework problem, right? And you know, every one of you can build a verifier for it, right? I just try all proofs of length 10, length 20, length 30, and so on. I keep enumerating over all of this. At one point, and if I find a right proof, I'll say, yes, the problem is true. Okay? But the problem with this is that if I gave you a wrong question, then you might be stuck in an infinite loop. You keep verifying all proofs, and you'll never end. To counteract that, we're also checking for the negation of the statement, right? So we're kind of doing something which perhaps we should always be doing in real life, which is not just trying to verify that the statement is true, but also trying to verify, okay, could the negation be also be true? Okay, we go do both in parallel. Whichever we find an evidence for, that's what we're going to go with. Okay, yeah?
So calculating both like DFF and DFF in parallel.
Yeah.
If F is not in now, then like won't the first instance of like our proof like return 0?
Yeah. No, but so the return will only be triggered when I find when the verifier says 1. When it says 0, nothing happens, right? So if V of F comma W is 1, then you do something. If it is 0, then I don't do anything. If you give me a wrong proof and my verifier said, okay, this did not work, I'm not going to immediately say, okay, I'm done, right? In other words, I gave you a homework problem, someone else gave you a wrong solution. That doesn't mean the problem is wrong, right? So here, suppose maybe you check the first proof that you had in mind and you got a 0. You're not going to do anything yet. You're just going to go to the next proof. Okay? So you keep doing this until at least one of them outputs a 1. meaning at least one of them convinces you that whatever statement it is, it's true.
The negation of that function has to be true.
No. That may not be the case. There could be proofs, both of these could be 0 for some W. But what should be true is either F or not of F should be true. Okay? So whatever the truth is, by completeness, there is some proof which will make you accept. It may not be the same, it's not going to be the same W, right? So there's some proof which will make you satisfy this condition, which will make you terminate. Okay, does it make sense? So the important thing is that you're using the completeness very strongly here. Either there's a proof for F or there's a proof for not of F. And you're going to find it eventually just because you're enumerating all possible proofs. All right? Any other questions? It's kind of subtle why you have to do both of this at the same time. You might be tempted to say, okay, I'm going to run V of F comma W for all W and then jump to the next one. But then you might be stuck in an infinite loop. So that's why you do both of them all like in parallel and then try for different proofs. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. So let me now say a few words about Gödel's original proof. Okay, that was way more, that was very different, and we'll do something like this in the next lecture, right? But to lead up to it, let me talk about Gödel's okay. So what Gödel did is very ingenious. He said, okay, suppose I give you a formula V, okay, so you're trying to show that there is no sound, effective, and complete verifier, right? Again, by contradiction, suppose there is a verifier for QIS, okay, that is sound, effective, and complete. Okay, there is a verifier which satisfies all three properties. So step one of his ingenious idea was, I'm going to use some kind of circularity to defeat this verifier. Given any formula F, I'm going to write down a new formula which is the following. I'm going to call this phi V of F, meaning it's something that depends on what the verifier is another QIS. And what does it say? It says F does not have a proof in V. Okay? Saying, okay, you given any formula, I'm going to write down a new statement, which is this statement does not have a proof in your verification system. It's well defined. You're not doing anything circular, right? You're just saying it might be a false statement. That's fine, right? So what does it mean to say does not have a proof in V? Means that for all W in 0, 1 star, V of F comma W is 0. Okay. This is just a statement. You know, we're not judging its truth or false. I'm just writing down a statement. Okay. Given any f, I'm defining a new formula which is just saying for all w and 0, 1 star, v of f comma w is 0. Okay. You have to encode it back into QIS, which takes some work because v is a Turing machine. You have to convert it back into like quantified integer statement, but you can do that. Okay. Now suppose you already did that. This is another QIS. We haven't gotten any contradiction so far. Right? So, you know, you just said this formula does not have a proof in V, which might be a false statement. That's fine. Okay. But then what he did next is mind blowing. So imagine you have the space of all QIS, right? So I'm jumping from one formula, like let's say I have F0, I apply this transformation, I get another statement. And then I might get another statement, I do the same transformation again, and so on and so forth. Okay. What he observed was that there should be a statement which maps to itself under this transformation. It's kind of snake eats itself, right? So there exists a QIS G star such that G star equals, okay. So given any formula, I'm doing some transformation. I'm saying this statement does not have a proof. You cannot prove this statement. That's my new statement. But at some point, the statement you ended up with is the same as the statement that you're going to output. Such things are called fixed points, meaning when I give the input to the function, what you get out is the same as the input. Okay. It's like, you know, this transformation behaves like the identity map on this one point. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's the non-trivial part. You know, once you show that there is a fixed point, you immediately get a contradiction. So what is this state? What does this mean, right? So logically, what it's really saying is, this is a little bit like, you know, this statement is false, right? If I say this statement is false, what is the truth of the statement? If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true, which is a contradiction, right? It is kind of the same thing. So it's saying G star is equivalent to the statement G star does not have a proof in V. Okay. Suppose for whatever reason we do know such a fixed point exists, right? It's kind of a miracle, you know, why such a thing should exist. It seems very counterintuitive. Why should, you know, I'm transforming the statement in some way. Why should the output again be the same statement? It seems very self-referential, ill-defined, but there exists such a thing. Okay. And at the very least, what we can show is that implies GFIT. If I can find a fixed point, then I get a contradiction. Why? Well, this is a quantified integer statement. Suppose G star is true. What is it saying? It's saying if the statement is true, it's saying it does not have a proof, meaning the proof system is incomplete. Okay. So if the statement is true, then the proof system is incomplete. just because that's what it's saying, you know. It's saying exactly that G star does not have a proof, which means it's incomplete. There is a true statement which you cannot prove. On the other hand, if G star is false, what does this mean? The statement is false means that the statement has a proof in V, right? Which is violating something about the proof system. What is it violating? Yeah, soundness, right? So implies G star has a proof, implies V is unsound. Okay, this is really like, you know, he captured the sort of childish logic that this statement is false. Okay, suppose I'm able to write down this in some form of QIS. This statement is false. Is P true? If it is true, then it should be false. If it is false, then it should be true, right? So what we have here is something very similar, okay? So typically when you face this conundrum and this fallacy, the way you get out of it, kind of, you know, is to say, you can't allow self-referential things in logic. Otherwise, you end up with statements that do not make sense, right? I can't write down something like this statement is false in mathematical logic because its truth or false cannot be determined, okay? But he is able to sidestep such an issue by defining something very concrete and identifying fixed points, right? But why does such a fixed point exist? How did he prove such a fixed point exists? That's what we're going to talk about in the next lecture. And that's Kleen's self-recursion theorem, okay? Which actually is much more general. It says it doesn't just apply to QIS or anything. And it's a little bit like, can you have a Turing machine that prints itself? Okay. So try and come up with a Turing machine which is going to print itself. Okay, we have a binary encoding of Turing machines. You know, when I run the Turing machine, it should end up on its tape with the exact description of the Turing machine, right? And what we'll do in the next lecture is kind of show that this thing, there's a general phenomenon underlying it, which is Kleen's self-recursion theorem, which talks about fixed points over computable maps, okay? And that will give us some understanding of where this twist in Gödel's proof comes from, all right? Okay, that's all for today, and I'll see you all on Wednesday.